Welcome to Spicer and Company. I'm Sean Spicer.
And I'm Lindsey Keith. Well, efforts are underway to rein in instances of excessive force by the police.
Yeah, Democrats on Capitol Hill are proposing the Justice in Policing Act. This is legislation that would include things like bans on chokeholds and mandates for police body cameras. Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer publicized the pending act by joining a group of legislators taking a knee. The scene took place at the Capitol Visitor Center. This follows weekend protests around the world, which were peaceful for the most part. But those protests are now going a big step further than calling for police reforms. Now there's widespread calls for a radical concept, defunding the police. This is serious now. In fact, some are calling for replacing the police with social workers. Tell me how that goes the next time someone is attacked or a burglar is trying to break into your house. The defund the police movement, though, has been picking up momentum across the country. Last week, we told you that Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti announced plans to cut $150 million from his city's police budget. And now, New York City Bill de Blasio, not to be outdone, announced that he's going to make cuts as well.
Based on the suggestions of the caucus, based on the work of the task force, that we will be moving funding from the NYPD to youth initiatives and social services. The details will be worked out in the budget process in the weeks ahead. But I want people to understand that we are committed to shifting resources to ensure that the focus is on our young people.
In Minnesota, where George Floyd died while being held down by a police officer, the city council president actually went a step further.
Our commitment is to end our city's toxic relationship with the Minneapolis Police Department, to end policing as we know it, and to recreate systems of public safety that actually keep us safe.
I'm not sure what that exactly means, though. In D.C., Mayor Muriel Bowser had Black Lives Matter painted on the street leading up to the White House. And protesters added to that by painting "Defund the Police" right next to the mayor's mural. Without police, what happens if you need help? Well, let's ask Daniel Linskey, the former Boston police chief, and Patrick Burke, who is the former assistant chief of the Washington, D.C. Police Department. Gentlemen, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me, Sean.
You bet.
Good to be here, Sean.
All right, Patrick, let me ask you first. The reforms that are being proposed, all of these things from additional body cameras to policing efforts, defining what you can and can't do with a suspect or a criminal, are those things that you and fellow officers could get behind, number one, in general, but two, do you think it's the federal government's role to put them down, or should that be a local or state thing?
Well, I think a lot of those efforts in D.C., Sean, have already been in place. When you look at the training, de-escalation, the use of body-worn cameras, and I think officers are generally big proponents of that because they protect the officers. And I'm glad to see that the mayor's supporting an increase in funding for the D.C. police, but because she realizes that a lot of these programs that the police department's engaged in, whether it's training or de-escalation training, directly impact those communities in need.
Let me tell you this, since both of you guys are from Boston and D.C. respectively, in New York City, where Mayor de Blasio wants to cut the budget, last year there were 95,000 criminal incidents. That's your robberies, your burglaries, assault, rape, murder, etc. By the way, that's down from 500,000 incidents in 1990, just to keep it in perspective. If you cut this budget, if you defund the police, even partially, regardless of whether or not you replace them with social workers, but just cutting that budget, Chief, what does that do to a police force?
The majority of budget is already laid out for us. So I have so much personnel costs that it is 90% of my budget. And then I have to keep lights on. I get gas for the vehicles to do the job. To answer 911 calls costs so much money. Discretionary funding in police departments is usually about 5%. And that's the funding that we use to try and get outside of our cruises and deal with the issues that we're seeing play out now. We need to do efficient and effective training. We need to do community outreach and engagement strategies. So we are having conversations and listening sessions with the community. They're listening and having conversations back with us. And, you know, when you look at the challenge of the ethical lapse of the three officers who weren't the ones who kneeled on Mr. Floyd's neck, but who failed to take action to stop it, how do we do training to prevent them from losing their ethical obligations in the middle of the field if we don't have resources to do it. You can cut the number of officers. We have the police departments right now that aren't at full staff. They can't get people who want to be police officers right now. So, defunding police is a unique concept. I'm all for. I think we need more resources to put in the police officers' hands. If we want to have cameras and police support that 100%, but that costs money, that costs funding.
That's right.
If we want to have community engagement, we need to have funding to allow it to happen.
Yeah, I mean, all of these things that we need to happen in terms of the reforms, body camera, that costs money. So I don't see how defunding it helps in the least. Chief Burke, let me ask you a question. The police departments are getting painted with a really big brush. So with respect to the Washington, D.C. Police Department, what percentage of it is minority to begin with? Because is that part of the problem, that these cities need more people from the various communities, or is that already being addressed in terms of the current construct?
No, that's already been addressed in D.C., Sean, and we've been a majority police department. And one of the efforts that the mayor specifically addresses is the importance of hiring officers from our community. And specifically, we talk about our cadet program, where we hire predominantly minorities from a lot of times from some of the tougher areas of the cities, pay for them to go to college. And when they turn 21 and they have those 60 college credit hours, we're hiring officers from those communities to serve those communities and pay back the city. And I think, even beyond race, when you look at sexual orientation, religion, the number of female officers in our jurisdiction, I think we really make a concerted effort to hire to mirror the image of our city.
I think one of the interesting questions I think raises is the recruiting of all this, and how do we now recruit ethical cops into a system where so many people are being harassed now just for their job, being a police officer now. So that's really changed.
It's certainly a challenge. We were having a challenge before, and I can only see it's going to be enhanced with these recent tensions. We need to have people who want to be involved in policing, that understand community policing and are committed to working with the community to build a policing response that's acceptable by everybody. And we need people who want to take time, energy, and effort and invest their lives in it. And right now, we're not seeing those folks stepping up to the plate just because they would rather do something else and not have to work as hard the way police are working hard across the country to try and maintain and rebuild trust and relationships in our communities.
Chief, let me play you a piece. The Minneapolis mayor, Jacob Frey, was asked to defund the police department at a rally if he was ready to do it. Take a look at what happened when he was out there with the crowd.
Jacob Frey, we have a yes or no question for you. Yes or no, will you commit to defunding Minneapolis Police Department? What did I say? We don't want no more police. Is that clear?
I do not support the full abolition.
All right. Lie! Don't waste our time! Go home, Jacob! Go home! Go home, Jacob! Go home!
So the thing that I have a problem with, Chief Burke, is we're at a state now where they're telling the mayor to go home because he's supporting it, the police department, at least in theory, keeping it around. How do the police start to get out there and talk about themselves? I mean, there's almost a PR problem for the police departments now around the country. What can they be doing to talk about the efforts that they're doing to reform themselves, how this is a minority of people that are doing these kind of bad acts? But Chief Burke, I think the police department needs to get out there in some way, shape, or form, or the police unions, and start selling their story.
I think a lot of the police departments through major city chiefs, IACP, have adopted a lot of these reforms. Obviously, there's a lot of work to do, but I think we need to continue to tell the message of the great work that officers are doing on a daily basis, and the understanding that, and imparting that understanding that minority communities would be the most harmed if police officers were defunded, or police agencies are defunded, and even further abolished in many of these areas. You can just imagine what would happen if there weren't officers to respond if someone called 911. And once again, these would be minority communities, whether it's a domestic violence call, a homicide call, if they don't have rapid response, or who's going to solve those crimes. So it's just, politicians have to grow a backbone. There's going to be a lot of challenging conversations. A lot of people are going to be hit hard on social media, and the boardrooms or the council rooms are going to be filled with protesters, but they have to understand and introduce reforms, but understand that they need to have police, and the police are out there to protect and serve as guardians of the public.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I can't wait till the first time someone calls 911 and they send a social worker out there to address the burglar that's coming into their house or the domestic violence situation. It's unbelievable that politicians aren't standing up to explain what's going on here. Chief Burke, Chief Linskey, thanks for coming back. I appreciate your insight into this.
Thank you.
Yes.
You bet. All right. Well, up next, President Trump has doubled down on law and order. But is that a winning strategy? We're going to ask Trump campaign pollster Jim McLaughlin. Plus, the NFL commissioner says that the NFL was wrong for ignoring players' protests. So, will more players kneel during the national anthem this coming season? That's assuming we have one. Well, we're going to ask former Super Bowl champ Burgess Owens. And Georgia Congressman Jody Hice is here. He's going to tell us whether the latest scoop on whether or not the Republican convention is going to move out of Charlotte, North Carolina.